The courthouse building was quiet. The guard didn't need to stand, there was no one to check. He sat down on a chair and opened a magazine. Suddenly, the door creaked open. It seemed like whoever was opening it was struggling. The guard jumped up and hurried to the heavy oak door, gently pushing it. Standing in the doorway was a skinny 6-year-old boy with a scraped knee and big sad eyes filled with determination. Clutched to his chest was an old stuffed rabbit. "What are you doing here?" the guard asked sternly. "Children don't belong in court." "I need to see my dad," the boy mumbled and dashed toward the turnstile. He swiftly ducked under the barrier and headed deeper into the building. "Hey! Stop!" the guard shouted, rushing after the boy. The boy ran down the corridor, then abruptly stopped right in front of the judge's chamber. Without hesitation, he grabbed the door handle and pulled it towards himself. The guard didn't catch up to the boy until he was already inside the chamber. "Judge Moreno, He just stormed in. I didn't even blink." The guard panted. "Daddy," the boy cried out and ran towards the judge. "You're really my daddy, right?" Judge Moreno rose from his desk and looked at the child. A picture flashed before his eyes. He was 5 or 6, just learning that his father drove the truck delivering groceries to the store near his house. He had run into the man's arms just like this. But the man had pushed him away, calling him a stupid kid, and started unloading beer crates. At 37, he remembered it as if it happened yesterday. The judge looked into the child's eyes. Where had he seen them before? They were so familiar. Of course. The boy from the orphanage. He often visited there. They even called him the benefactor of the orphanage. Charity was an important part of Judge Moreno's life. He lifted the child into his arms, looked into his deep eyes once more, and smiled. "Son, you finally found me," he said. The secretary and the guard stood gaping in astonishment. Gustavo Moreno and his mother lived in his grandfather's house. Despite his grumbling, the old man loved his daughter and grandson dearly. Poverty was a constant companion to the family. Grandfather caught fish and sold them at the village market, while his mother worked for a farmer. Gustavo never saw his father, never even knew who he was. His mother abruptly shut down any attempts to learn about the man. Over time, the boy stopped asking. Then the local boys decided to play a prank on naive Gustavo Moreno, telling him that Bruno, the driver who delivered goods to the local store, was his father. He believed them. He wanted so desperately for his life to have a father, a real father. But little Gustavo only gained another childhood trauma when he ran to embrace that angry truck driver. He cried for 2 hours in the attic of their ramshackle house before falling asleep. His mother and grandfather frantically searched for him. Life changed dramatically when grandfather passed away. He went fishing and never returned. They found him in the boat. He had managed to tie it up upon returning from his catch. His heart just stopped, simply refused to beat any longer, that's all. Nothing held mother and son in that godforsaken village anymore. Mother made the decision to move to the city. Money was scarce, but she decided to take the risk. There were more opportunities for her and her child in the city. Everything fell into place from the very beginning. Mother got a job as a janitor at the school. Gustavo started attending that same school. They lived in an annex to the school building, where the caretaker used to reside. But the former caretaker's lodge had been abandoned for several years already. Then Yolanda married a school teacher. Gustavo gained a little sister, Conchita. Gustavo studied well, grasping everything on the fly. He was determined to get a good profession and break out of poverty. One day he asked his mother, "What is that building opposite our house?" "That's an orphanage," his mother replied. "There live children who have no one in this world. You see, there are 2 buildings. One houses the very little ones, and the other is for children from 3 years old." "Why don't they have anyone?" Gustavo inquired. "That's just how it happened. For instance, they all died, and there's no one to take care of the poor things. The boy became sad. He wanted to do something good for these children, but he didn't know what or how. One day, he and his little sister were passing by the orphanage fence and noticed a little girl with curly hair crying, huddled against a tree. "Why are you crying?" Conchita asked her. "Today they took Miguel home, and I'll live here all my life." Tears streamed down the little girl's reddened cheeks. "Don't cry, I'll give you my bunny. He's magical and grants wishes." The girl squeezed the plush toy through the fence bars. "Really?" The girl stopped crying for a moment, asked. "Really? What's your name?" "Elena." "Bunny, always protect Elena and bring her luck," Conchita said. "He'll do it. Always keep him with you and don't give him to anyone else, then everything will be very good in your life." They walked on, but for some reason, Gustavo often recalled the face of that little girl, especially at night, sometimes lying sleepless in bed. Years went by. Gustavo entered law school. The young man swiftly climbed the career ladder. By the time he was in his early 30s, he became Judge Moreno. He remained in the city where he and his mother had moved from the village. His stepfather and mother moved to the neighboring town. There, the former teacher was offered a position in a private school. This happened back when the guy was still in university. Gustavo achieved the goal he had set for himself in childhood when that mustachioed, gruff truck driver roughly pushed him aside and called him a fool. He became a successful man with a substantial fortune. Devoting his entire life to his career, he, at the age of 37, still hadn't started a family, although if he had beckoned with his finger, a crowd of beauties would have flocked to him. But his finger was firmly pressed to the gavel, an integral part of any judicial process. No one could have imagined that a judge with an impassive gaze could speak to some boy in a crumpled t-shirt and a scraped knee like this. "Let's go," Gustavo said, effortlessly holding the boy with one hand. "Where?" the boy asked quietly. "To the shelter," the judge replied shortly. The secretary and the security guard exchanged glances. Judge Moreno simply didn't want to cause the boy any pain, but now he would just return the child to the shelter. It would cause the same pain, but just a little later. That's what these two thought. "Why to the shelter?" the boy asked tearfully. "We need to tell everyone that you found me, settle some formalities." "Formalities?" The boy looked puzzled. "Are they mean?" "No, a bit tedious, but not mean," Gustavo Moreno chuckled. Suddenly, he glanced at the stuffed rabbit the child was holding onto. Embroidered on its chest was the inscription Moreno. Gustavo felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, and shivers ran down his spine. It couldn't be. Could it be the same rabbit that little Conchita had given to the girl from the shelter? What was her name again? Oh yes, Elena, the girl from the moon. "Where did you get this rabbit, kiddo?" Gustavo asked, seating the boy in the car. "He's been with me since birth," the boy smiled. "I guess my mom gave him to me, and then left me at the shelter." He looked about 6 years old, but he reasoned like an adult. Gustavo's heart ached. This person always knew what he was doing. Everything in his life was in order. But now the judge was behaving completely uncharacteristically. What had come over him? Why did this kid evoke such a response in his soul? As if he truly had once been his lost son. Maybe he just saw himself in this little rascal. Possibly. "Judge Moreno, do you realize what you're doing?" Senor Fernandez asked, adjusting his glasses on his nose. "This is a child." "I'm aware, Senor Fernandez," Gustavo replied calmly. "I want Vito Moreno to become my son according to all the rules of the law. I'll start the process today, and I believe all formalities will be settled by Monday. But Monday is only 2 days away. Ample time if we don't procrastinate and proceed with the matter immediately." The director understood. For the judge, with his connections and influence, this was a 5-minute affair. "Can I take the boy for the weekend? And on Monday, I'll bring him back here to complete all the formalities." "I think, yes," replied the old director, pushing a blank application form towards his interlocutor. You need to fill this out. It's the procedure. No problem, said Gustavo, taking the pen. He was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. Senor Fernandez, please tell me, do you keep the personal files of the children from previous years? Say, from 20 years ago? Yes, of course, the files are kept for 50 years. Why? Just over 20 years ago, there was a girl living here, with curly hair. Elena. I don't know her last name. I was just a boy back then, but I still remember her sad, hopeful eyes. Ah, you're a romantic, Judge Moreno. I've been working here for 10 years. One girl named Elena was released under my watch. I had just started working at the shelter. But I remember her. She was a bit of a loner, always sitting and drawing. I think her paintings are still hanging in the children's playroom. Do you keep track of the further fate of your wards? Gustavo asked, running his hand through his hair. Well, it depends on the circumstances. There are troublesome kids, so sometimes we have to, but generally, no. I see. Can I find out the full name of that graduate, Elena? All right, I have your number. I'll ask the secretary to help with that. Once I have the information, I'll let you know. Okay, thank you, Senor Fernandez. Have a good evening. Goodbye, Senor Moreno. Vito sat in the corridor on a wooden bench waiting for Gustavo. So, champion, ready to go home? Gustavo winked at him. Hooray! Where's your home? Right here in court? No, kiddo, I have a very ordinary home. The man took the boy's hand. Gustavo didn't know what to do with the child. He started reminiscing about his sister. She was 8 years younger than him. Gustavo remembered reading her fairy tales. Conchita listened, holding her breath, especially if there was something exciting in them. Gustavo read with different voices, portraying either the wolf, or the poor little goat, or even a mouse. His sister laughed, holding her stomach, and asked for more and more. They had dinner in the gazebo. Gustavo ordered food from a restaurant. Phew, this meat is spicy, exclaimed Vito. Dragon's meat, perhaps? Why dragon's meat? Gustavo asked with a laugh. Because they breathe fire. Probably, their meat is as spicy as fire. The boy leaned towards the glass of water. I see, next time I'll order without pepper for you. Take some cheese bread. It's definitely not spicy. Are we going to live together? Suddenly asked Vito. Yes. Buddy, together. Do you think we'll manage? We'll manage, assured the boy and started eating his bread. In the forest, it was quiet. Only the faint sobbing of a young woman leaning over a small mound of earth could be heard. At its peak stood a simple wooden cross, without a photo, without a plaque. Fresh flowers lay on the mound. Forgive me, my little one, for not protecting you, the girl said through tears. All these years, I've blamed myself for not waking up in time. They didn't even let me say goodbye to you. Why did Diego do this to me? He just said you were dead and buried you here that fateful night, a few hours after you were born. Elena visited this place regularly. She remembered her baby, the night he was born. For years, she replayed this scene in her head. She was all alone in the forest cabin. Diego hadn't returned from hunting yet. Why did she even go with him? She was about to give birth soon. It all started so quickly that Elena didn't even realize at first that the baby was coming. She tried to call Diego, but there was no signal. The ambulance couldn't be reached for the same reason. The poor girl didn't know what to do. The contraction started around 4 in the afternoon, and by midnight, the baby was born. He was weak, hardly crying. Elena was very tired, so she fell asleep with her son close to her. When she woke up, it was dawn. The baby was not beside her. Elena jumped up and anxiously looked under the roughly hewn bed. No trace of the baby. Diego was not in the cabin either. The girl went outside. The forest birds chirped softly, as if wishing each other good morning. Diego's car was parked not far from the cabin. So, he had returned from hunting. Suddenly, the guy emerged from the bushes of young juniper with a shovel in his hands. "Diego, where's our son?" Elena shouted and rushed toward him. Her stomach responded with pain. "Elena, baby, our baby, he's gone. When I entered the house, he wasn't breathing and was cold as ice. I didn't want you to see that, so I just buried him here, in the forest." "What? That's a lie. It's because of you. I shouldn't have come to this wilderness. I couldn't even call for an ambulance. My baby was born in this damned forest cabin. Why didn't you wake me up, you scumbag?" Elena pounded the guy's broad, sturdy chest with her fists. "I'm sorry, I couldn't. I know I'm guilty. Maybe if you were in the clinic, things would have been different." "You never cared about our child," the girl continued to scream in hysteria. "You barely cared about me, really. All you cared about was drinking beer with your buddies and hunting. I hate you. I hate you." Elena sat right on the damp grass still wet with dew and cried, curled up in a ball. Then suddenly she jumped up. "Where's my son?" she demanded an answer. "He's nearby. If you want, I'll show you. We'll visit his grave." He led Elena to an old pine tree. There was a mound of fresh earth piled up. The girl knelt down and leaned over this mound as if over her baby's cradle. "My little one, I couldn't protect you. Forgive me." Diego smoked off to the side, not looking at the girl, overwhelmed with grief. It was unclear from his face whether it pained him to see Elena or he simply didn't care. "Make a cross," Elena told Diego, and walked towards the little house. The girl tied a ribbon she had prepared for her son onto a tree by the road so she would know exactly where to turn. She knew she would come here many times more, to lay flowers on her son's grave and cry for hours. She parted ways with Diego as soon as they arrived home. She simply gathered her things and went to live with a friend. He didn't try to stop her. Apparently, he really didn't care about her or their baby. Elena was here again, in this cursed forest that took her little angel's life. Sometimes she felt like it was just a bad dream, that her son was alive and would come running to her from behind, covering her eyes with his tender little hands. But it never happened. There was still just a hill with fresh flowers laid on it. Almost immediately after dinner, Vito fell asleep. At first, the boys whispered to him and told him that his father was a judge, that's why he supported the shelter, but he didn't want to take the boy himself. A scuffle broke out, and then Vito seized the opportunity and ran straight into the courthouse. And then the indescribable feeling of happiness that now he had a father. Vito didn't care whether he was a judge or a janitor, he just wanted to be someone's son. He wanted to live in a family. That's what all the shelter kids wanted more than anything else in the world. A hearty dinner finally finished off the little boy. He fell asleep right at the table. Gustavo carried his son to the living room. He gradually got used to the idea that he now had a son. What was he doing? How was he planning to raise the baby alone? For some reason, these thoughts didn't scare him too much. It was as if he was waiting for something to happen, something that would help him and Vito to make the best life they could. The new father sat on the couch, next to the sleeping child, and played with a plush rabbit in his hands. Suddenly, he felt something inside the toy. It felt like a small ball. There was a hidden zipper in the rabbit. He remembered it from when his little sister used to play with it. She loved this toy, even asked their mom to embroider their last name on it, so no one would ever mistake it for theirs and take it away. Gustavo carefully unzipped the toy. Inside, among the soft filler, was indeed a plastic ball made of two halves. With a gentle movement of his fingers, the man opened it and found inside a folded piece of paper. There was his portrait. Yes, it was his portrait. He was about 15 in it. His sister never liked drawing, and this drawing was clearly done with love and great skill. It was obviously drawn by a talented child. Could it be that the same girl, Elena, with her unruly curls and big sad eyes, was Vito's mother? He said they found him with the toy. But why did she leave her baby? She knows all too well what it means to be an orphan and not feel parental love. Could circumstances have forced her? Gustavo resolved to find her, or at least find out where she was and what she was doing. Diego returned to the forest cabin around 1:30 in the morning. He immediately sensed that something was amiss. There was a strange smell lingering in the cabin. Elena lay on the bed, clutching a bundle to her chest. What was it? A pillow? He squinted and illuminated it with his phone. Oh no! It was a baby. While he was away on the hunt, his girlfriend had given birth. Alone, without any medical assistance. Diego's thoughts raced like wild animals in a cage. No one knew the baby was born, the girl hadn't registered at the clinic. Let her believe the child was stillborn. Life is easier without a spineless creature to care for, and he didn't want to lose Elena. Diego acted swiftly. He carefully picked up the newborn. He was so weak, so tiny, that for a moment, Diego hesitated, but then he wrapped him in a nearby woolen shawl, tucking Elena's favorite bunny inside. She carried it everywhere, like a child. The night allowed for quick travel, without any traffic jams on the road. Diego knew where he needed to go. He parked the car a little way off and approached the building. Easily finding the box, he gently placed the little warm bundle inside and hurried back to the car. Returning to the forest, he set about constructing a fake grave. Approaching the cabin, he encountered his Elena. No one could say whether Diego regretted what he had done. But by getting rid of the baby, he failed to keep the girl by his side. Mutual acquaintances told Elena that Diego had gone somewhere and disappeared. She didn't care. She realized she didn't truly love him. Heaven only brought them together for their son's birth, only to take him away. Silence enveloped the shelter. The wards had already fallen asleep. The duty nurse sat at her post, trying to fight off sleep by reading. Suddenly, the bell rang, indicating someone was in the box. The young nurse retrieved the tiny baby, hastily wrapped in a woolen shawl. Doctors didn't hold out much hope for the boy's survival, he was so weak. But Vito survived. That's what the duty nurse, who found the baby in the box, named him. They gave him the surname embroidered on the toy that lay with him. Vito Moreno sounds quite life-affirming, exclaimed the baby's godmother. Perhaps thanks to such a name, the weak little boy born in the forest cabin survived, thrived, and became a wonderful child with bottomless eyes. On Saturday afternoon, Gustavo took Vito to the amusement park and also arranged a meeting with his best friend, Jose, who was the head doctor at the children's clinic. Wow, buddy, you've really done it this time. How did you dare to adopt a kid out of the blue like that? Or am I missing something? Laughed Jose. Jose, I couldn't have done otherwise. He walked straight into my office as if someone was leading him there. When I looked into his eyes, I knew right away we were meant to be together. Usually that's how people talk about girls, Jose chuckled. Come on. You're kidding me. You're quite the joker. Gustavo slapped his friend on the shoulder. You know, I suggest we examine the kid tomorrow, Jose said, becoming serious. Is there something wrong with him? Gustavo asked. No, just to make sure everything's okay. Let's meet tomorrow at 12. I'll meet you in the lobby. All right, Doc, you'll convince a dead man. Gustavo slapped his friend on the shoulder again. The weekend flew by unnoticed. Vito was already asleep when Jose called. Why didn't you tell me right away, buddy? Jose started without preamble. Tell you what? Gustavo was surprised. That Vito is your son. I told you, the adoption will be official. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about blood relation. The kid is your son. We did a DNA test just in case. Jose, you're kidding. This can't be. I don't have any children. I haven't been with a woman in ages. You're making this up. A son. Think back to your life about 7 years ago. Maybe you'll remember some passionate beauty. Oh, come on, Jose. You and your jokes. They talked a little more and said goodbye. Gustavo didn't sleep well that night. His friend's words kept echoing in his head. How could Vito be his son? What happened in his life 7 years ago? He began to remember. There was Letizia. Yes, Letty had him dizzy. Back then, Gustavo wasn't a judge yet, could afford such adventures in life. And he seriously considered marrying her, even wanted to propose. But it just didn't work out. That evening, Gustavo flew to his fiery ferry with a bouquet of flowers and a ring in a velvet box shaped like a rose. He wanted to surprise her and didn't warn the girl he was coming. They stood on the porch of her house, him, Letty, and some biker in a leather jacket and a black cap. They merged in a long kiss and resolutely didn't notice anyone or anything around them. The young people were clearly absorbed in each other completely. Gustavo felt like he was burning. She reciprocated his feelings. And those unforgettable nights. Was she just playing with his feelings? But when did she manage to hook up with this biker? Or was he there before him, but they broke up and then got back together? All he could do was guess. Gustavo threw the bouquet and the rose-shaped box right on the grass next to his car wheel, sharply turned the steering wheel, and headed home. Approaching, he suddenly changed his mind and decided to go to the first nightclub he could find. He wanted to drink and loud music that would drown out his pain at least a little. The hall was roaring. The youth was having a blast. What else to do on a Friday evening? Of course, have fun and party. Gustavo immediately noticed a girl sitting alone at a table. Ordering and swallowing a double whiskey right away, Gustavo headed towards the lonely beauty. Is this seat taken? Gustavo asked, turning on all his charm and trying to sound as casual as possible. No. My friend had a fight with her boyfriend, and they left me here, the girl replied. And you didn't have a fight with yours, then? Nah. Because I don't have one, she chuckled softly. I'm Gustavo, the young man said, taking a seat opposite her. ELE, the stranger smiled. ELE. Sounds beautiful. At that moment, Gustavo didn't care what this beauty's name was. He just wanted to drink and briefly forget his sorrows in her embrace. And he succeeded. She was so young, so breathtakingly beautiful. The girl didn't ask about anything, she just disappeared from his life like a shadow in the noonday sun. When Gustavo woke up, she was already gone. Since then, Gustavo hadn't had any serious relationships. He immersed himself in work and swiftly climbed the career ladder. There was no time for love affairs anymore. It wasn't appropriate for Judge Moreno to chase after young beauties who only wanted to take advantage of his position and money. That wasn't for him. Deep down, he remained a romantic, ready to climb a cliff to rescue the one he loved from the clutches of a dragon, the one whose mere glance would make his heart skip a beat and butterflies flutter throughout his body. But, unfortunately, Gustavo hadn't met such a person yet. Could it have been, Gustavo pondered, lying sleepless, Elena, Vito's mother? That girl with tear-filled eyes behind the orphanage fence. Why hadn't she found him? Why hadn't she said she was expecting a child? Maybe she didn't even know the baby was Gustavo's. ELE, she called herself ELE. She could very well be Elena. Gustavo's heart pounded as if it wanted to leap out of his chest. Inside, it felt oddly sweet and painful. It's like when you return from a long journey to your hometown or a loving home. Gustavo picked up his phone. Elena Sanchez, he read the message from the orphanage director again. Where can I find you, Elena Sanchez? Gustavo knew he would find her, and quickly. With his connections. All matters regarding Vito's adoption were settled. Now it was time to search for his mother. Gustavo could afford this, after all, his vacation had begun. It was so symbolic that little Vito had entered his life on his last working day. He didn't know what he wanted to ask Elena. He didn't intend to judge her, but he still wanted to understand what made her abandon her child. Gustavo drove to the address provided. Elena lived in a remote quarter on the outskirts of the city. 4-story houses were crammed together, leaving almost no space between them. Poverty stared at Gustavo from every corner, but he didn't care about that. He was eager to see the one who had flickered in his life like a firefly, the one who had abandoned her newborn son several years ago. Gustavo parked the car and walked to the specified entrance. He dialed the apartment number. "Who is it?" a hoarse female voice sounded. "Can I see Elena Sanchez?" Gustavo's voice quivered slightly. "ELE is at work," the woman on the intercom responded. "And where? Where does she work?" "At the Three Palms Island Cafe." 2 blocks from here, the uncommunicative interlocutor muttered and hung up. The cafe turned out to be quite cozy. Tables surrounded an oval island with 3 palms. The floor was painted in the color of the sea. It created the impression that the tables were standing right on the water. There were quite a few visitors. Only 2 couples sat at tables, chatting cheerfully. "Hello," greeted him the waitress with neatly tucked hair and a tidy uniform. "Did you reserve a table?" "No." Gustavo was flustered and glanced at the girl's name tag, Elena. "Holy Virgin Mary. It's her. Let me escort you to a very comfortable table." The waitress walked along the tables with a light step, as if gliding on the floor. "Are you expecting someone, or will you be alone?" "Alone. Honestly, I didn't plan to linger." They approached the table. "Are you Elena Sanchez?" As he sat down, Gustavo asked. "Yes, that's correct," the girl answered, slightly puzzled. "And you are?" "My name is Gustavo. Gustavo Moreno. Can we talk somewhere quiet? It's very important." "Is it related to my work? I hope my neighbor Reina didn't do anything wrong." "No, I just need to talk to you about something that happened a few years ago." "Don't worry, nothing threatens you. I just need to clarify something." "I finish at 7, Elena said quietly. "Where can we meet?" "I'll pick you up at 7, and we'll figure it out," Gustavo said. "Please bring me a cup of coffee, no milk or sugar." "Okay." Elena quickly slid past the tables. Gustavo was there 6:45. Elena fluttered out of the cafe at the beginning of 8. The girl was dressed very simply, jeans and a dark t-shirt, a small gray purse slung over her shoulder. Gustavo got out of the car. "If you don't mind, can we talk right in your car?" the girl suggested. "Not at all, just let's move a bit farther from here." He opened the door. "What did you want to talk to me about?" Elena asked straight away. "About your son," Gustavo answered quietly. Elena flinched. "How do you know I had a son?" Elena's breath caught. "It's a long story. Where's the plush rabbit you loved so much as a child?" You're like some sort of magician." Elena tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Asking me such strange questions that only I should have known about, but apparently, information flows like water." "So, where is that rabbit?" "He's buried with my baby. There, in the forest. That's what my ex-boyfriend told me." "Wait. You didn't give up your baby and drop him off at an orphanage, did you?" "Of course not. What are you talking about? I still visit my son's grave." "Why are you talking about an orphanage?" "Because your son lived there for 6 whole years." Elena stared at him as if she'd seen a ghost. "What are you saying?" "My baby died almost immediately after birth. It was in a forest cabin. I couldn't call an ambulance. I don't know who told you that, but your son, along with a plush bunny embroidered with the Moreno surname, my surname, lived all these years in the orphanage. They found him in a box, hastily wrapped in a woolen scarf along with that same bunny." "Oh my God. The scoundrel. What a scoundrel he is. He dumped our son in an orphanage and told me he died, that he was as cold as ice." Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks. Gustavo started the engine. Where are we going? Elena asked through her tears. To my place. I'll introduce you to Vito. Which Vito? Your son. And mine. What do you mean? What does mine mean? I adopted him first, and then it turned out I'm his real father. But why do you claim he's my son then? My boy's father was that idiot Diego. On the way, Gustavo told Elena everything. She cried and literally tore her hair out. Why am I such a fool? She scolded herself. I believed that idiot so easily. So, does it mean I've been regularly bringing flowers to just a mound of earth? There's no trace of my boy there. For 6 years and 2 months, I've been living only in anticipation of going back to the forest and sitting on the grass, crying and talking to my son, whom I saw only for a few minutes. No, it's monstrously unfair. But now everything will be okay. I hope you're not too upset that your boy isn't Diego's, but mine? Gustavo stopped the car. We've arrived. It's hard to describe what happened when Elena saw little Vito. It's easier to say there were lots of tears, hugs, and tenderness. Stay with us, Gustavo offered. I feel out of place in your fancy house, Elena smiled. Are you a mayor or something? No, I'm just a judge. Wow. You judge people. That must be tough. I definitely couldn't do it. You're right. It's tough, especially when so much is corrupt, so much lying in this world. I'm seriously considering a career change. So, what do you intend to do? Elena inquired. Vito fell asleep in her arms, and she held him, unwilling to let go. Just think, Diego deprived this boy and Elena herself of the joy of being together. For 6 long years, they were apart. Elena never experienced what it was like to raise a child from birth, while Vito grew up in an orphanage, the same place where his mother grew up. Fate sometimes sets up incredible traps for us. I want to write books, Gustavo simply replied. What? You dedicated your whole life to the law, and now suddenly you want to write. What will your books be about? Well, about love, for instance. And I also want to write some thrilling detective story. I have so much to tell this world, I've seen so much in life. Just the legal proceedings alone are worth it. People are truly amazing creatures, they do things you couldn't even imagine. And I never became an artist, like I dreamed of since childhood, Elena sighed sadly. You will become one, Gustavo assured her. Talent cannot just disappear like that. I found that drawing in the rabbit. How did you do it? Oh, just the usual, sketched it with a pencil. But you only saw me for like 2 minutes. Then, by the fence. 2 minutes is enough to make a sketch, the young mother simply replied. Do you draw? Well, sometimes I draw, just pick up a pencil and try to depict something. I always had to survive. If only I hadn't gotten involved with Diego. He ruined both my and Vito's lives. Don't exaggerate, he only slightly shattered your life, but it will easily regenerate, believe me. We'll manage it. Elena's heart beat faster. This we spoke louder than any words. She never had this we, there was only her and a big, rather hostile world that didn't rush to spoil her, but on the contrary often gave her a slap in the face, or even a kick in the rear. Thank you, Gustavo, Elena said emotionally. If it weren't for you, I would never have met Vito. I would still be wandering in that forest, crying by the hill. You know, if it weren't for my friend Jose, who secretly did a DNA test, I wouldn't even know that the boy is my blood relative. I was speechless when he told me. By the way, he thought I already knew. Well, one Vito was in the know, Elena stroked the sleeping boy's back. Children sense much more than us adults. Elena stayed to sleep in the room that Gustavo had gradually turned into a nursery. She watched her little son, peacefully dozing off on the bed, and couldn't take her eyes off him. She thought about how they would live now. After all, she needed to officially confirm that she was Vito's mother. And Gustavo? He was his father. Just think. A fleeting encounter makes a man and a woman parents, and yet many do not appreciate it, do not rejoice in what has happened, and even blame fate. Back then, 7 years ago, Elena couldn't have imagined that her life would turn out like this. "Ele, come with us to the club tonight," Lorena suggested, the girl with whom they rented a room from an old lady. "But weren't you going with Ricardo?" she asked in surprise. "So we'll go together," Lorena twirled in front of the mirror. "I don't know. Nightclubs aren't really my thing." "Oh, come on. Let's have some fun. Maybe we'll find you a husband." Still, her friend managed to persuade Elena to go with them. It all started well until Lorena was asked to dance by some guy. Ricardo caused a scene and stormed out of the club, and Lorena ran after him, forgetting about her friend. Elena decided to stay. She sat alone at the table. And then that handsome guy in an expensive suit with sadness in his eyes appeared. The girl felt like some kind of spark ran between them. That had never happened to her before. It was different with Diego. They just met and started dating. At first, she found it interesting that he always wanted to go somewhere. They walked under the moon, went to see the sunrise in a little park or by the riverbank. But then all that romance was left behind. Diego had his own life, friends, hunting, working as a car mechanic in a garage, and she, Elena, gradually faded into the background. Then the girl found out she was pregnant. Diego suggested getting rid of the baby back then, but Elena firmly decided to give the child life, with or without him. She never thought that this person could commit such an atrocity. It's a good thing he took the baby to an orphanage and didn't abandon him by the roadside. Apparently, there was still a shred of humanity left in him. Elena tried not to think about those awful events. Now she had to think about her son, her little boy, who had been deprived of maternal love all these years. Both of them had to make up for what they had missed. Elena fell asleep, holding Vito close to her. She hadn't felt this happy in a long time, since the moment she gave birth to him in a cabin in the woods, far from civilization. Perhaps she could say she felt something similar when she was in Gustavo's arms. He was a little drunk, and she wasn't entirely sober herself, but it didn't matter. They were happy together that night, very happy. "Vito, sweetheart, call Daddy for dinner." Elena called out to her son, who was drawing in the living room. "Coming, Mommy," the boy ran into his father's office. They entered the kitchen together. What's that smell?" Gustavo sniffed. "Meat with vegetables," Elena replied, drying her hands with a towel. "And why haven't I met you earlier?" He kissed his wife on the shoulder. "I would have enjoyed such delicious food." "No need to flatter," Elena joked, poking her husband in the stomach. "Maria, your cook, is excellent." "Yes, but it's still not the same." "Have you finished that wonderful sunset?" "Just a few finishing touches left." "And how's your detective novel going?" "Oh, it's intense right now, gives me goosebumps. I can't wait to read it." "You'll definitely get to it, probably in a couple of weeks." "And I gotta be in Spanish," suddenly said Vito, taking a bite of his meat. "What?" his parents exclaimed in unison. Vito was an excellent student. "Ha ha. Got you." Vito burst out laughing. "You guys were sitting there believing, I wrote a sunset, I'm finishing a book. I had to stand out somehow." "You little rascal," his mother protested. "We went over all the rules with you yesterday." "But you can stand out in other ways, son," his father ruffled his hair. "How?" Sipped some juice from his glass, asked the son. "Well, for example, by building a cool house out of building blocks. Isn't that ordinary? Any kid could do that." "No, not everyone. We could build it together and then decorate it, say, with seashells. We have plenty of those." Elena looked affectionately at her son. "No, let's rather go for a walk together after dinner," Vito suggested. "That's how we'll stand out." "What's so special about that?" his mother asked. The fact that we're the coolest family in the universe, the boy stretched out his hand, and his parents did the same. They bumped fists. It was their ritual. How great it was that those mischievous boys from the shelter, who teased little Vito so cruelly, told him that Judge Moreno was his father, the one who placed him in the shelter. If it weren't for them, this magical flower, the Moreno family, wouldn't have bloomed now. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.